All right, hello, welcome to another lesson on inheritance. Before we get into the main lesson, one warm-up question for you here about if we were think of musical instruments. We have like a instrument superclass, and then we have subclasses called guitar and trumpet, and probably a whole bunch of other ones. But if we were going to put in these different methods and data into this hierarchy, where do you think it would go? Pause the video and give it a shot. Please know there's not one right answer to this, because honestly, if I was doing instrument, I might have like a string instrument subclass, and then trumpet, and then guitar and violin and stuff would go underneath a string instrument. And you might have like horns over here, and then trumpet and trombone and stuff go below that. So you might have like a couple other layers of classes in here. But anyways, for the ones we have up here, a play method I think would make the most sense up in an instrument, because every single instrument you would play, and then you could obviously overwrite it down in the subclasses. Num strings would be something that would be associated with guitar. And again, I would probably have like a stringed instrument class here, and I would actually probably put it up there. But anyways, for this one, I'd put it in guitar. And is tuned, I would also probably put up here, because I think almost all instruments you tune. I could be wrong on that. I'm not a great instrument mind. I kind of failed out of band and class and stuff when I was a kid. I joined choir, and then I was like the worst choir singer ever. So as you can tell by my beautiful sing-song voice. All right. Anyways, today's lesson on inheritance, I just call it object is the superclass of everything. All right. And that'll make more sense as we go. But we're also going to talk specifically about two methods that are in object called toString and equals. All right, so what happens is when you make classes, right? I have this one, let's see, I just made this warm-up one here. This is from the other day. If you don't put any extends here, by default, it's going to extend a class called object, right? Which is just the most general. I could try this, see if this actually lets me do this. It looks like it actually lets me do that, but it's basically there by default. Whether you put it there or not, any class is always going to be a subclass directly or indirectly of object. Okay, so like if I look back at this hierarchy, we made these questions, their parent class was question, but technically they're still a subclass of object, because object would be the parent class of question. So object sits at the top of everything. String and scanner, every single class in all of Java, either directly or indirectly, object is the superclass of that. Right. Another way to kind of examine this is if you looked at some hierarchies. So if you just do like JavaDoc and then pick a class like scanner. So we can look at the JavaDoc for that, even though this is Java 7, it really doesn't matter. Let's see. Oh yeah, so it looks like you can see right here, object is the superclass of scanner, right? That's what this little path is saying here. Okay, so let's look at another one. Let's do JavaDoc for array list. This one might be a little more interesting. You can see kind of like the inheritance hierarchy. Okay, so you can see there's array list, then abstract list, then collection, and then object sits as a superclass of all of those. So this is kind of the inheritance path for array list. Okay, so the point is you can look up a bunch more if you want, but at the top of all of them is going to sit object. Okay, so it is the parent class of every other class in Java. Okay, and so if you look up more information about object, this is kind of like a JavaDoc information about it. It lists all of these methods, right? So like equals, get class, hashcode, notify, notify all, toString, wait. So all of these methods, I don't even know what all of them do, to be honest, but every single class is going to have these methods because I think they're public methods, and object is the superclass of them. So later in this, we're going to talk about a class called country. We're going to make like a country representing like the USA or Canada or something like that. All right. And so what you'll see is this one, country, just has a GDP and a name and a get method. But if I actually make some country objects, all right, if you watch, if I type Canada dot, you can see it has a whole bunch of methods besides the get GDP and get name, right? In country, there's only actually two methods. right? But when I do dot, I have options to a lot. And the reason is all of these other ones are the ones that are in the object. In fact, you can even see it listed here. I don't know if you can see that tiny little writing, but you can see where get class and hash code and all they exist in object. Okay, so those are basically the methods that you see here. That's what I'm seeing when I type dot, right? So even though they're not in Canada, that's where they're coming from. Okay, so those are kind of methods that every object will have, right? Java set it up so that every object would have those different methods. All right, and we want to focus not on that, focus on specifically two methods called toString and equals. Okay, and so these are the ones that are kind of relevant to the AP test, especially the equals, right? And so what they do is they exist already, right, by default. In fact, I'll kind of show you here. So if I run toString again, I don't have toString in this country at all, but if I hit run, right, it prints out something at least. Okay, and so that's the toString method for object. Okay, because country does not define toString at all, it's going to go up to the parent class, which is object, and then it'll run that toString method. All right. Just to give you a visual of this, we're making this country class here, and you basically just watch. I'll have you do an example coding thing here in a second, but this part just kind of pay attention to it. And so we are going to call toString, and right now it's just running the one that's an object. Okay, so when we run this toString on our objects here, on our country objects, it's just running the one in the parent class. Okay, so what I want to talk about is oftentimes you can overwrite toString. Okay, and sort of the point of toString, I'm not sure if it says this in here. Let's look. Yeah, so it's used to convert the object to a string. Okay, so especially like in a print statement, you want to I want to print out a string, and so if I have a country object, I might want to turn it into a string before I print it out. Okay, and in fact, this is a little weird, but you don't even actually have to call toString here. If you do a system out print and then pass in the object, right? If it's not a string, it'll default convert it to a string using the toString method, right? So sort of the idea is this print needs a string. So if you pass in something else besides a string, it'll just turn it into a string by calling that toString method. So you could call it, I can show you both ways. You can call it with toString like that, or you can just literally pass it in and it'll run the toString by default, which is kind of weird, but it really does the same thing. Okay, and the default toString, by the way, prints off, I always thought it was like a memory location, but I'm honestly not really sure what this is. It's just some gibberish about the country object. Okay, so instead of gibberish, all right, we want to make the toString actually meaningful, right? So what we can do is go into country, and we can overwrite that method. So I'm going to overwrite the toString method. Okay, and so to do this correctly, all I have to do is make sure the signature is exactly right. Okay, so I'm going to go in here and say it returns a string and doesn't take in any input parameters. Okay, so I'm going to make a public method here. So I'm going to do public void because it doesn't, no, string because it returns a string, and then do toString with nothing coming in. Okay, and I can check again real quick, but that's the right setup. Okay, and so that will correctly overwrite the toString method. Okay, and then all I want to do is return this country as a string. Okay, so maybe I want to return the name of the string, or sorry, the name of the country. Okay, so if I do that, and I'm going to go back and run it, now I have a new toString. Right, so now that we overwrote toString, it's going to run the toString down here in country. Right, it's going to overwrite the one. It's not going to use the object one anymore. It's going to use the one down here in country. Right, since we've defined it right there. Okay, so now when we run it, it actually prints out the names. Okay, and so you can kind of decide, right? If you wanted to do something different, I'm going to go back into country, and then I'm going to return the name plus some has a GDP of plus the GDP variable. Okay, so I can actually return a different kind of string, and then when I go back here to country runner, it'll now print out a little more elaborate information. Uganda's got quite the GDP. Okay, and again, that's kind of a weird thing, is that you don't really need the toString call here, because system.out.print turns it to a string by default. That's kind of the point of toString method. Okay, so next up I want to talk about the equals method. All right, so equals determines when the objects are considered equal. Okay, and so the default one, right, will only return equal if they're the exact same spot in memory. Like, I think by default they're kind of like memory pointers, so like if they point to the exact same spot in memory, they'll be equal, otherwise it won't be counted as equal. Okay, so just to show you how this works, I'm going to do Canada dot equals Wakanda. Okay, and that should be false. And then if we do Canada equal to itself, does Canada equal Canada? You got to pass in what country you're checking against. So here we're checking Canada equal to Wakanda. Here we're checking Canada equal to itself. So the first one should be false and the second one will be true. Okay, and that's the default equals method. Okay, but kind of the cool part is we could say, well, you know, since it's our own object of country, we could say, well, what makes them equal? Okay, and you can decide whatever you want, right? You could certainly make an argument that two countries are considered equal if they have the same GDP, right? You could certainly think of a scenario where that would make sense, okay? Or you could say, well, I only want to count country object equal if they have the same name, okay? Or both. Maybe they have to have the same name and the same GDP. You can set it up however you want. That's kind of the power of the equals method. All right, so the way I'm going to set it up, well, let's just try one. Let's do if they have the same GDP. Okay, so what I got to do is go into my country object, and I got to overwrite the equals method. Okay, and so you have to get the heading exactly right. So I'm going to go back here and look it up in this information. So it returns a Boolean, and it passes in an object we're checking to see if it's equal to. Okay, so I'm going to do public Boolean equals, and then you do have to type object O here or something like that. I don't think the name right here matters. It just has to pass in an object. Okay. All right. And so one of the things that's kind of goofy on this is a generic object, the parent class. So the very first thing I usually do on an equals method is I want to return it into a country object, right? Because I know they're going to be passing in hopefully another country here to check against. So I'm going to do country, and I'm just going to call it temp, and I'm just going to take and cast that object O into a country object. Okay, so when you do equals, that's usually the hardest thing, is you have to remember to cast it into the object type that you want. Okay, so now I have, well, let's maybe do this one. I'm going to call this one other country, representing the other country. So now I want to check if the class I'm in, right, because remember this, I'm inside of a country, right? When you do it, you're calling one country equals another. So this will be the country that you're in, the object that you're in. So basically, I want to check if this dot GDP equals the other country dot get its GDP, right? And I should do equals, right? So if their GDPs are equal, then I want to return a Boolean, in this case true, else I want to return false because they are not equal. Okay, so this would say I'm going to define the countries as being equal if they have the same GDP. Okay, so I'm going to go back into country runner, and it still will be that Canada is not equal to Wakanda, but Canada is equal to Canada. And then just to kind of change this, so I'm going to delete this line. But then I'm going to make Wakanda have the same GDP as Canada. Okay, so now it should return true based on how we set up the equals method. All right. So again, the equals defines how they're equal, and you could make kind of a call on country. You know, how do we want to determine they're equal? You could have it do for GDP, or you could have it do for the name. All right. I think I'm gonna make a follow-up video that goes into this a little bit more. So I'm running out of time. Thanks for watching.